today we are here with Maggie and Beata, where we're talking about how to navigate a catastrophic event. And both of the wonderful ladies who are with us today have unfortunately had to weather that themselves. I'm going to ask you, Maggie, to go ahead and introduce yourself, share with us a little bit about where you live and where your property was located that was impacted by a hurricane.
My name is Maggie, and we live in Topsail Island, North Carolina is our primary residence, also our STR during the summer. And we also have a home in Sneads Ferry, North Carolina, just across the bridge. And I am a licensed real estate professional as well. We self-manage our STR, and we were impacted heavily by Hurricane Florence, both to our personal residence, which sustained over $150,000 worth of damage, and then our short-term rental, which was oceanfront as well.
Goodness gracious. Beata, how about you? Share with us a little bit about who you are, where you're located, and where your property or properties were located that were impacted by a hurricane.
My name is Beata Lorinc. I live in Cary, North Carolina, and I had 3 ocean fronts in Surf City, North Carolina on Topsail Island during Hurricane Florence in 2018. Unfortunately, all 3 were severely impacted. One showcased itself on CNN pretty regularly for a while. That gives you any indication. And I had the extreme displeasure of filing 3 flood claims, 3 wind claims, and I believe the total damages across the 3 properties, one was disproportionately higher, was over $300,000.
Holy smokes. If anyone is listening and has been impacted by last week's hurricane or have gone through any sort of catastrophic event, our goal is to equip you with information and hopefully some tips and tricks of how these 2 fabulous ladies navigated the situation. And hopefully, you can glean learnings from them that you can go and implement over the next weeks, months, and years. Maggie, I want to start with you, and I'm curious. Before hopping on this call, you mentioned, hey, I have insurance everywhere. Talk to us a little bit about when you were impacted back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. What was the process like dealing with your insurance companies?
Well, I was in Virginia watching the news and watching my neighbor scream, "We're being flooded out." She was on the Today Show. And I was like, I'm getting on my phone. I'm filing a claim now. And my husband's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "We're on the news." Like I'm getting first in. So it was kind of nice at that point. We had at that point a national flood insurance policy on our home, which I've since dropped for other reasons. And then we had our regular wind and hail. So the nice thing about filing so early and doing that right away was I got a very low number. So when I came back and was able to get back on the island, the one guy, I was one of the first people that he saw. We didn't even have power yet. And I remember him, he walked through in his suit. He was just like, do, 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 do. And he gave me some tips and tricks. And actually even though, and I don't know how much in detail you want me to go into, but he had an assistant. She was just like running behind him. He was literally in and out in 5 minutes. But he asked me some very specific questions, which I learned later why he was asking those questions. And we were able to register a claim there. And then the other person couldn't get to us because everything was so damaged. And that was with Frontline Insurance, which has since pulled out of the coastal market. A lot of the insurance companies that used to write here don't write anymore. And Frontline was pretty good to me only because I had a very, very good restoration company that had my back. And that's the people that come in and rip out everything in the mold and help you document what you need. And she was pretty much lost. She was very young. You're going to run into a lot of young agents that don't know what they're doing, because think about it. They're having to bring in all kinds of temporary workers from she was from, I think, the New Orleans area. And Katrina happened after that, right? Didn't it? Can't remember.
No, Katrina was before that.
So I think she cut her teeth on Katrina. So she wasn't that green, but one of her biggest challenges is she couldn't find a place to stay. So the
Wow.
day she came to me, she was in Myrtle Beach. That's where she found a place
Wow.
in one of the
Wow.
ocean fronts down in Myrtle Beach. And she had to make a long drive to get up.
Sure. Would you mind sharing a little bit more detail about what that insurance worker was asking you and the intent, why he was asking you those questions?
So on my house where I am, I'm on stilts. Okay.
Okay.
So when you have flood insurance on stilts, they only cover a very limited portion of underwater, and it has to have to do with flood waters. Similarly to your wind and hail person will come and they'll hunt around your house. I've had that before. They've hunted around the house. They're looking for a flood mark, because what they're going to try and do is blame it on flood. They like fight each other, and the flood guy is going to be like, that's wind and hail. So he was looking for a flood mark to try and, take a picture of it and say, oh no, this is flood. So my guy, it was really nice that the fence was pushed down in the back, just totally pushed down. And I think all the debris from Topsail Island, this was my primary residence, had come onto me. I learned that they don't cover carrying that away. I had to pay that all on my own. But anyways, the flood guy wanted to make sure that the flood waters had come up if I had any documentation. Thank goodness I did. You could see the flood line on the inside and the outside. Unfortunately, flood, when you're on a raised house, only covers a very few things downstairs. It covers a water heater, as long as it was elevated, ours was, and a freezer. Go figure that out, because I guess that's what people normally have underneath. And you look into your documents, and everything else is pretty much your SOL. They want you to have floodgates and let that, unless lapping water hits your first level, or like probably you with your ocean fronts, if it impacts the pilings, like something had to do with surging water. So I was like, well, lapping water where I am didn't hit my first finished level, which is up 12 feet. But he was very nice. He said, I'll see what I can do for you. And then I hear him starting to give his notes as he was running out the door to go to the next person. And he also said, I told him that my hardwood floors upstairs were cupping, because they were, because of the high humidity. So he says, I'll get you some remediation money, because my downstairs was finished and wet and gross. It was creating a humidity pocket that was coming upstairs. So he was able to get me about $6,000 in remediation expense, dehumidifiers, things like that, for my lower level that impacted my upper level, which was covered by the wind and hail. I was also, he gave me like $5,000 for the fence and a few other things, but mainly what I got from the flood insurance due to my house being raised was just the remediation expense, because I was raised and there was no flood damage on my upper levels, because the water has to hit it.
Wow. So Beata, when Maggie was talking about the flood person and the wind and hail person arguing with each other, I could see you going, yeah, that happened to me too. So this sounds like a very regular occurrence.
Yep. So, I mean, insurance is a blessing. Obviously, without it, we can't get through these kind of events. But as we all know, that we have to work to get payouts, because they're not just handing over money. And it is a fairly common occurrence that in areas where flood and wind, that you carry both policies, that oftentimes they're trying to peg it on each other so that nobody pays out, or they try to get the other guy to pay out. My biggest house that had the issue, if you can imagine the houses that are all on pilings, mine was essentially an elevated ranch. If you so just basically the A-line roof, but the A-line wasn't facing this way with the ocean; it was facing this way. So it would have been a dollhouse opening up to the ocean. And basically, what happened is the flood, the surge, the lapping water took out 8 of my 16 pilings on my house. Literally knocked them down.
Wow.
The reason being is, and I could laugh about it now a little bit, but we bought this home in June of 2018. We gutted it in 6 weeks. We're working 20 hours a week to try to salvage a little bit of the summer. We got it rented at the end of July, and the hurricane took it in September of 2018.
Wow.
I mean, talk about just the kick when you're down, like in 100 different ways. But we had inherited it, if you could imagine those pilings, someone, this house was 40, 50 years old. Someone had put vertical boards across the front of the pilings to, I guess, create some sort of barrier for the driveway. Because you have to keep in mind the dunes stretched for many, many, many feet before that. We actually, on this particular house, had about 40 feet of decking width, like going toward the ocean, of decking and staircases that literally just didn't exist. Like it took the entire before and after photos that like would just boggle your mind.
Yeah.
So this, like, essentially what they inadvertently created a retaining wall. So as the ocean was pounding, and if you recall Florence, it was unusual because it wasn't just the hurricane hits and moves on. It sat in front of Topsail Island for 3 straight days.
Right.
And so for every high tide, it just pounded and pounded and pounded. So eventually this retaining wall kind of collapsed. So as the retaining wall collapsed, my house literally cracked in half at the roof line.
Wow.
So I had foundational issues, which flood had no problem saying they would cover. The issue was it poured into my house for an entire week before we were allowed to get on the island.
Yeah.
Flood was saying you had rain. That's a wind issue. Homeowners were saying the reason you had rain inside your house was because the foundation collapsed. That's a flood issue. Oh God. It just literally the only thing that saved us is one tiny corner of the roof got ripped out, and we had evidence that the ceiling collapsed and so we can clearly show kind of that normal, you lost part of your roof and then it caved in. Even though most of our water intrusion inside was because of the roof line breaking.
And that's very, very important. I would like to say, when my mitigation guy, that's one of the arguments that he did, he spent a lot of time on the outside of the house. And I'm like, what are you doing, Mark? And he's like, you'll thank me later. And he was like trying to find a piece of the roof or one piece of siding that had gotten pulled off. So if you have just a little bit, and we did, and he's like, one little corner, and he was like, I gotta find something on the roof. And sure enough, he did, and it wasn't much, but that's it. Like, cha-ching, opens up the whole, and they're not going to trace that one shingle and the fact that it maybe let water in your kitchen, but yet you have damage in your master bedroom. It's just like that creates a claim. So you have to have some sort of exterior wind damage. Doesn't have to be much.
Cracked window, collapsed roof, door busted open, something like that.
And that's for your wind policy. Is that correct?
Your wind and hail. Yep. Which is what most hurricanes are.
Exactly.
Right.
This one in the mountains, very unusual.
Sure. So
I
I want to go back to, for the people who are listening who do have maybe flood and wind and hail. I know so many people are being impacted that don't have flood insurance at all. And I want to get to that conversation in a moment. But Beata, I want to go back to what you had said where, your insurance folks were going back and forth. How did you advocate for yourself? What did you have to do to advocate for, hey, wait a minute, I'm the person who had the loss here. Let's try to help me instead of you two butting heads. How did that?
This segues really perfectly into do I hire a public adjuster or do I not hire a public adjuster? And I would say for a vast majority of people, hiring a public adjuster is a very, very smart move, and it will ultimately give you the best compensation you can get. For me specifically, I was in a slightly different position. At the time, this was my full-time job. And my public adjuster was overtaxed, and I had a vested interest in getting my homes up and running and operational. So unlike a lot of what's going on in Western North Carolina now, where many towns, like an individual can get their home up and running, but their town is not going to be ready for guests for a long time. Topsail looked bad for almost 2 full years afterwards. But in many cases, we had guests coming a few weeks later. We still had businesses open, restaurants were open. People were happy to come and support the community. So I was trying to get my houses open and running as fast as humanly possible. 2 of them sustained far less damage, so I focused on those 2 first. But what I ended up finding was, in terms of how I advocated for myself, Documentation. Documentation is your number one best friend. Take timestamp photos and videos. Matterports actually saved me a ton. We having very recent photos of your listing. So things to do for future to protect yourself. Update your photos minimally once a year. Spend the few $100s and get a Matterport, because the Matterport proved literally every single personal item I had in the house. So you need all that documentation, because like in our cases, we had entire chunks of the house that just disappeared. So how do you prove what was in there? Because typically, you can see the stuff that's left over and it's damaged. But in some of our cases, and especially what's happening in Western North Carolina now, there's no evidence the stuff even existed. So having that photo documentation, just keep it like as a business rule, minimally once a year, update all of your photos, do video tours. But I ended up, blessedly with this particular house, I literally had just done the remodel. I had just finished purchasing it. So I had receipts for literally everything. So that helped me tremendously. Another tip that I had provided before that I think really still works well is, if you are financially able, and I don't know what your experience, Maggie, was, but after talking to many owners, months and a year later, most people needed to, because it makes sense that they needed to wait for their check to come and then begin their repairs. Most of the folks that did that, and I talked to them, they ended up finding that check didn't cover all their repairs. I actually did it a different way. I ended up, I basically maxed out every single credit card we had access to. I emptied savings accounts. I took personal loans from family members, and I basically paid for all my repairs out of pocket, and then was fighting for my insurance to reimburse me. And I found when I did it that way, in hindsight, because the adjuster might say that, hey, and I'm just making things up, a new roof is going to cost $10,000. Well, guess what? When roofers are now a year backlogged, and now a $10,000 roof in reality costs $15,000. But since I had a receipt that said Beata Lorinc paid out $15,000 for this new roof, and I'm making up the numbers, nobody can get a roof for $15,000 anymore. And they gave me $15,000 for the roof. Whereas when you do it the opposite way and you wait for the check first, and the check says $10,000 for your roof, it is really difficult once your claim is closed to go to the insurance company after the fact that said, hey, that's wonderful, you gave me $10,000, but it also actually cost me 15.
Right.
To add to that, a lot of the restoration companies are, I don't know,
they take advantage of the situation.
Or take advantage. I mean, they're the ones that come into town, they're storm chasers.
The storm chasers, yes.
So what they want to do is they hand a piece of paper and they're like, sign this. And what that is saying is that they get 100% of the insurance amount. And they'll keep fighting the insurance, similar to a public adjuster. But if you are financially able, and a lot of them do shoddy work. Over at my HOA, there was 24 units, 12 of them were damaged. I was the president of the HOA. At that time, we had insurance that was called all-in insurance. And so that meant that the HOA had to do the inside and whatnot. There was a contractor up out of Texas that they used, and we were involved in a big lawsuit. They came in and they see that money. They see that $300,000 or whatever, and they go in and they halfway do stuff like face nailing pieces of siding. Instead, guess what? That whole side of the house, they got paid by square footage. Okay, you take it down. If you can't match it, you can't face nail siding. It hooks in certain ways. They didn't even put the vapor barrier on behind them. I saw them, that's the tar paper or your blue skin. They just did it as quick as they could and get out and they grabbed the money and ran. So you got to watch out by signing that piece of paper. If you are able to take the insurance money yourself and then subcontract out the roof, hire your own flooring guy, hire your drywall guy. And by the way, you are allowed to do your own repairs if you are handy. My husband, we flip houses and we've done that for years. That's how we built our wealth to be able to buy a short-term rental. And we invest in long-term rentals as well. once we started flipping houses, and we're like, oh, let's just keep this one. It's nice. It turned out cute. So definitely, if you can, get your own check minus your deductible and hire out your trades. You will do much better, because otherwise they will take all the money and they will complete as little of the repairs as they can, and then they're gone.
So I want to ask you about that. What should someone be asking of a restoration company? What types of questions should they be asking, number one? And then number two, what are the red flags? So I heard you say if they just come in and say sign here, but are there any other red flags that people should be aware of? Maggie, what are your thoughts there?
The biggest thought is make sure you have insurance, because you got the flood or the wind and hail. You're going to have to call, because on that piece of paper, you better read it. And read every word of what you are signing, because basically you're signing your rights away, and you're also signing. And by the way, if we don't get paid, guess what? You're paying us. So that would be the worst thing, because restoration companies, they're good and they're bad. They get the job done. They come in with the huge trucks. Your biggest thing is you got to get that water out. You don't want a house full of mold. Most people have a cap on their mold coverage of $5,000 in almost every single policy. So you've got to stop.
Maggie, to interrupt, but big tip, don't use the M word in front of insurance. It's always water damage.
It's water damage. True. You're
not
right
use
there.
that M word to your insurance
because mold, then you're done with your $5,000. So don't even have a mold
water
test.
damage. No, you do not use that word ever.
And don't have a mold test. That's true. It is water damage, because that's what it is. It is water damage, but it's important. Get that water damage out. Get that drywall out. Get the dehumidifiers in there. Get that air moving. That's what you have to do. And if you don't have power, then hopefully you have generators, or hopefully your restoration company comes with generators, and they will charge. They have a line item per day for the generator, per day for your dehumidifier and all that. But just watch very carefully what you're signing, because most of them want to sign that blank check. Like, you're going to give us everything from the insurance company, and then they will go after the insurance company for more. And sometimes it works out well. We had a very good contractor that did our siding, and they noticed, and we had the roof problem, and the roof problem just didn't go away. And we had another storm right on top. Remember, Isis came right after Florence. And we still weren't repaired, and we got water damage in again, and they figured out that it was something wrong with the roof. And so they were able to go back to the insurance company and fight, and they got us an additional $30,000. Now, in that case, I said, you know what? If you get me a new roof, guess what? You can keep the check and give me a new roof. If you're going to fight that hard for me, and if you can get me a new metal roof, because it's a metal roof, I'm like, yes. And so I did sign the piece of paper in that limited instance, because I was like, if these guys can get me a new roof, I'm all about that,
Yeah. So I still want to go back to, how can someone, and maybe there is no easy way to recognize, but how can someone recognize, hey, this is a storm chaser that is just after my insurance money versus this is a legitimate company? Any tips or call out?
If they're from out of state, I mean, the reality is, using Western or North, well, let's use Florence as an example. There were not enough local laborers that could possibly repair all of our homes on a timely basis. So it's inevitable that the out-of-staters are coming. And just like everything else, for every one amazing company that is traveling and is willing to do this and is there, and of course gets a premium for it, right? They get daily stipends on top of their work and labor. They're willing to be on the road. Admire that. There's so many other companies that are literally scamming people. I mean, I knew people personally that gave roofing deposits and then never saw those roofers ever again. So the difficult part is, and that's a hard question to answer, Stacey, because you are literally going through trauma as this is happening, right? So you've just experienced a traumatic event. Now you're watching destruction all around you. This event is going to impact you personally, professionally, financially, in various ways, depending on how bad your damage was. And here comes someone who makes it sound and look really easy. I'm here to help you. I will do everything for you. And maybe I'm just not a very good trusting person, but as soon as somebody tries to solve all my problems that easily, to me, that's the red flag.
Okay.
What I
Because
would do is limit with a restoration company. A lot of them do the water mitigation, which is taking the water out, getting you dry to where your levels are that you're dry, and then the rebuild. Okay. They're going to also, and I had one do this too, they're going to also rip out as much as they can before the insurance guy gets there. Because when it's gone, it's gone. So we had one bad one and a water damage claim on our oceanfront house that came in, and my neighbor, I'm living in Virginia at this point. I'm managing from Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pre 2018. And she's like, what's going on? Are you doing a remodel? And I was like, why? What are you talking about? She goes, there's a dumpster in front of your house and there's all kinds of stuff going in the dumpster. And I knew that I had hired this restoration company because a water valve had broke and the kitchen floor was damaged in the kitchen cabinet. They were ripping out the entire floor upstairs that my husband had just laid because they said that the humidity levels were high on that floor. So still to this day, I don't know, slimy contractor, you want to try and be there. In hindsight, I should have been there.
Okay.
But I did what's called a stop work order. I was in construction and I emailed that to him. That means basically hands off. It's kind of like, when you're medically, don't touch me, or, I don't,
Right,
I'm
right.
DNR. It's like,
Right.
yeah, you best stop right now, and hopped in the car and drove the 5 hours to get down there, and then met with the owner of the company saying, what are you doing to my house? Why are you ripping it apart? So they will try and rip up as much as they can, but don't be worried because you want, then it is tough because on hindsight, you want everything out, anything wet, plus insurance will pay. Let's say my floor, I'm looking at it right now. I have hardwood floor that goes throughout. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a transition strip, they will stop at that room. If you don't have a transition strip, guess what? You get paid for continuous all the way because you're not going to be able to match that hardwood or that special laminate. So even it'll go in a bedroom that might not be affected, that say it's luxury vinyl or something. Yeah, it goes to, once it stops the transition, but if not, same thing of the ceiling. If your ceiling is in a great room and it goes all the way across, they're supposed to not just patch the one section that caved in, they have to patch it, smooth it out, but they have to paint the entire ceiling from wall to wall. And these are the shortcuts of what a contractor says, give me the whole check. And if you look at the line item on it, it has them getting paid, I don't know, $1,200 to paint the ceiling. But guess what that guy will do? He'll just roll that little spot and call it a day. So yeah, I learned to read those reports very well. They're very confusing when they come in from your insurance adjuster and your mitigation person. For example, they go room by room, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. Why can't they just say, 1,000 square foot of baseboard? No, it's like 256 pieces of baseboard, and then priming the baseboard, and then painting the baseboard, and then removing the baseboard. I mean, literally, our claim was, I think, 300 pages long. It's very difficult. And then they'll total out each room. So they go room by room. They don't go whole house paint, $6,000. They go each little room.
Okay. Maggie, I want to go back to your experience working with a public adjuster. I actually just learned what a public adjuster was for the first time earlier this week from one of my students in my program. I have never.
You would think the name would be private adjuster, right?
I know.
Yeah,
exactly.
it is a very confusing term, to be honest.
Yeah.
So will you share with us a little bit about what that means and your experience utilizing a public adjuster?
So initially, the HOA claim that the insurance wanted to pay us was $30,000 for 12 houses. We knew something was up. Luckily, one of the guys, I never learned what it was either. He had said, we're hiring a public adjuster. So he found one of the ones, and I think he was from the Wilmington area. I don't know if it's the same one you used, but he had actually written a book on it. Is he the author that wrote the book? Yes, no? Your guy that you didn't know about? Okay. Anyways, he wrote a book on it. And he's like, here's my book, this and that. So what they do is they are going to fight and get you every penny you deserve. Okay. They're also going to get paid typically 10%. Is that what you encountered? It's kind
10, I think
But, and you're
That
worried,
feels
you're
about
like,
right.
oh my gosh, how am I going to pay that 10% on 300,000? They get you so much money that we had leftover money. We were able
Mm.
to fix the community, and we had like $60,000. Sorry, they went from 30,000. No, sorry, I misspoke. They went from $300,000 insurance claim to like 1.6. That's
Wow.
how much it swayed. They got us all new roofs. They got this, they got that. So they know what they're doing, and they know how to fight your insurance company. They know exactly what they're doing. And so if you want somebody on your side, and this guy said, don't worry about my fee, you're going to get more than enough to pay me.
Right.
And this was true in our situation. We got more than enough to get the houses back to where they needed to be, because they know every trick, like the strip, go
Mhm.
from room to room.
Right.
They know it all, and that's their job. That's what they do. So I was very pleased. And if I ever go through a large event like this, I will hire a public adjuster
Mhm.
right away.
Mhm. Interesting. Interesting. I also want to ask you about um, kind of the emotional side of this because Beata, um, I remember you mentioning like, hey, uh, all joking aside, I think I have PTSD from this, event that happened years ago, and I'm sure that everyone who has been impacted by this most recent storm is feeling the same way, right? Um, and the other thing that you mentioned, which I thought was a really, really important point to bring up, is that we understand, all of us understand that there are losses of life. There are people that have lost their primary residences. And we obviously don't want to negate that at all. And at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge as short term rental owners, we have losses too, right? If you've been impacted by this most recent storm, you have a loss, whether you're in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina. And so I'm curious, you know, Beata, from what you've seen, how have you dealt with the emotional side of maybe friends, family, people who know you on social media not being empathetic towards what you were going through?
That to me was probably the most surprising and difficult part that I had to go through, and I'm watching others go through it now, which is why I'm a bit passionate about making sure that people acknowledge that and understand that because my experience was so I mentioned I had three ocean fronts, right? So there's a little bit of a must be nice kind of
Mhm.
attitude going on there. What most people don't realize is that um, I worked for a corporation for a very long time. I left that corporation when my second son was born. This ended up becoming my second career. We were highly, highly mortgaged and highly leveraged. This was my new career. I mean, that's what it was. This wasn't, Greg and Beata have millions of dollars sitting in our back pockets, and we bought these ocean fronts. We swung for the fences and took a big risk that most people aren't willing to take. And in that case, we took a risk and we kind of lost in that way.
Mhm.
Right. But, I talked about this loss and what, I mentioned to you, before we started this podcast was that I came literally mere inches from financial ruin and total bankruptcy of my family. And blessedly, we didn't go there and we were able to get past it, but it really was touch and go. They had condemned our house. They gave it 30 days to fall. If it fell, all bets were off. What most people don't realize, and something I want to mention, is especially when it comes to oceanfront or just any home, but it's most relevant in oceanfront or just areas where land is very valuable. Insurance companies insure your dwelling. They do not insure the land it sits on. So in most cases, you're able to rebuild on that land. But what's unique about oceanfront, especially in the Carolinas, is many of our oceanfronts are currently what they call non-conforming, or layman's terms, unbuildable. So if that house falls, you can't rebuild. And so your $600,000 lot just became a $30,000 lot. And most people have that $600,000 lot mortgaged. And so that's what we were facing. And that's the trauma I was going through. And that's, my husband would come to me and say, what are we going to do if this house falls? And most people in my life were, oh, must be nice to have 3 ocean fronts. Or, well, at least you're sitting dry and happy in Cary and you're not, you didn't lose everything you own. And so it was just this guilt trip and this lack of understanding. And of course I was empathetic to the people who did lose their primary homes. And in some cases their places of employment and schools and so much more. To be personally, you can't go to an area that's devastated, that you poured your soul into this community, and not be devastated by the loss you see around you. But at the same time, you're also going through your own personal loss.
Mm-hmm.
So my best advice is don't look for support in maybe the places you normally think you're going to get it. Find people who are literally in the same boat you are. And it's most likely going to be an STR owner in a similar community going through the same thing that you're going through, because without that support system, it is very lonely. It compounds the emotional issues you're going through. You start feeling like you don't deserve to get anything because your primary home is still intact. There's just a lot of odd and strange emotions. And then there's this bizarre battle of whose losses are bigger, because, maybe somebody just had a $50,000 damage and somebody else had a $200,000 damage.
Yeah.
Like, disasters like this truly bring out the best in humanity, but unfortunately also the worst in humanity.
Yeah.
And I think, we all talk about the insurance and the physical rebuilds and, the loss of use, and yes, but I don't think we spend enough time talking about the emotional impact. And that literally stays with you for years and years and years to come.
Yeah.
I can attest to that. We are house flippers. That's how we got our money to be able to get an oceanfront house. And that's very risky. I walk into houses all the time, foreclosed houses, this and that, caved in ceilings, M word, mold. It's like, okay, it costs this much, da, 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 da. Not as big of a deal. When we walked into our house and saw the ceilings that were caved in and saw all of our furniture and stuff everywhere, we were just like, we didn't know what to do. Now, how did I not know what to do? I didn't. I couldn't move. I was lucky. I had another friend that was a house flipper as well and realtor. She's like, Mike and I are coming. And I just want to cry. They came.
I know.
Like, what do I do, Claudia? She's like, we're going to get some garbage bags. We're going to get some masks. We're going to do this. She's like, Mike, clear out that room. Kenny, start pulling that yucky mattress out. I mean, we had a Sleep Number bed. Oh, by the way, if anybody has a Sleep Number bed, we went to Sleep Number in Wilmington, and typically they'll do this afterwards. You get a new one for half the price. It's amazing. Yeah, a lot of advantage of the community. Ask when you go to buy something, say, do you offer hurricane victim? It's kind of like saying, do you have a military discounts?
Right.
Companies do. There was a
know that.
company in town. Yeah. So it took 2 guys to drag this soggy mattress and throw it outside. I mean, just dragging stuff, because I did not know what to do. I didn't know what to do because I was just walking from room to room like
Stunned.
a crazy lady, just,
sure.
Picking up one thing and, just like,
Right.
But yeah, try and get some support if you can. That's very, very important.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind, and I'm watching folks go through this now just on social media, is, again, many of us who are in this industry are not independently wealthy and didn't buy these houses in cash and are using this as kind of bonus money. Most of us took risks and are mortgaged and are leveraged. And so a lot of folks right now, I'm watching this play out in real time, are very, very worried about the cancellations that are happening. They're saying, hey, my house is actually okay. I've got power. You can get to my house, but everybody keeps canceling. And, people are on social media saying, what can I do? And they're getting attacked, literally attacked and vilified that they could dare to talk about money or income when there's so much loss of life.
Or give it for free to align.
Or give it away for free and things like that. And it's like, and my heart is breaking for those folks, because I feel the palpable pain, because simultaneously, of course, every one of those owners and all of us and all of this are listening, that our hearts break for the loss of life and the loss of infrastructure and primary homes and all of that's happening. But in addition to that, people who are leveraged and mortgaged have a real issue on how am I going to pay my mortgage? Because in Western North Carolina right now, fall is one of the peak seasons. And
Yeah.
if they lose this peak income, it is going to be very, very difficult for them to get through the spring. And I
Sure.
don't think there's enough place and grace for these folks out there to have these real conversations. And I would love to help try to create a safe place for these folks because it is a very real problem that needs to be
Yeah.
discussed. And they shouldn't get shot down just because they're worried about their livelihoods
Right.
with everything else going on.
Right. I could be on a soapbox, but I just feel like social media is such a powerful place for many different reasons, but people are so hateful to other people on social media. And I just feel like, if we just focus on being kind and supporting one another, what would this world look like? My dog agrees with me. My 3-pound chihuahua is down here barking. But why there's no need to be hateful to other people, whether you're on social media or in front of their face. But what if we just all focused on like supporting one another and empathizing and being understanding? I just feel like, gosh, we'd see so many more smiles on people's faces, you know?
I agree.
Maggie, I'm curious from your perspective, knowing that you have tremendous experience flipping properties. Have you done anything different in your properties now since you experienced the hurricanes versus previously? So you mentioned like the transition strips.
Mhm.
Anything else as far as from a rebuild perspective that you do differently now since you have experienced a hurricane?
Waterproof luxury vinyl, the good stuff, not the stuff that has you put down the vapor barrier and then you put the luxury vinyl on top, the one that actually has the backing built into it. I mean, you can get luxury vinyl for 99 cents a square foot, or you can pay $6, the good stuff that
Mhm.
snaps in between.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
unfortunately, our house, and we have it downstairs, and we put it over tile. It was like really dated, 80s, you know what I'm talking about, that
Yeah.
gold,
Yeah.
but it's a good base. It's a good base,
Mhm.
but I didn't want tile floor. So we put
Mhm.
a nice, it looks like, hardwood floors, and
Mhm.
it snaps together very nice. And guess what? When our water heater broke and flooded our downstairs, my husband was able to go like little Legos, took them
Right.
outside, dried them out, hopped up and dried.
Wow.
A couple days later, after we had our new water heater, it was put it right back
Wow.
in. It was wonderful. And we always also extra supplies, especially with flooring. And I learned this the hard way at our beach house, because 3 years from now, you think Lowe's is going to carry it. No, they don't have it. And you
Mm.
might just have a little damaged area, water intrusion comes in through underneath a door or whatever during the next hurricane, and you could just piece in some pieces. And if you don't have any extra, it's tough to find. And it's nice because then at that point we did have extra when we had some water that came in, and that insurance company ended up paying us for the whole floor. And just because the insurance company pays for the whole floor, and it is not insurance fraud or anything, it isn't. You can take that money and you can decide what you want to do. You can upgrade, you can downgrade, they're going to pay you for what you have. Okay.
Mm.
In our personal residence, we had thick hardwood floors. Do I want to put these thick hardwood floors back in? No. We chose to go with a less expensive version, luxury vinyl. Same thing, kitchen cabinets. This might be important for flood. If you have insurance, they will only pay for your kitchen cabinets that are damaged. In our case, it was the lower kitchen cabinets. They don't pay you for the top ones, and they don't
Mm.
have to match. They don't have to match. Luckily, my husband, being handy that he was able to just take off like some of the panels, and he put new panels on. Sherwin-Williams love their paint match computer. They can paint match. Painted kitchen cabinets are all the rage. Replace your bottom cabinets if you need to, then go and have them all painted a beautiful color. You know, your tops and
Mhm.
your bottoms, now you're matched again if that's what you want. But you don't have to rip them all out. We got paid for our bottom cabinets, but not paid to pop the granite off. How are you going to replace a cabinet with the granite on? Most granite companies won't come and touch it because they're afraid to pop the granite off that it's going to break. So
Right.
we had to get creative. Are my cabinets perfect right now? No, they still look a little bit battered and worn, but you know how the glazing goes in between to look like grandma's cabinets? Well, my cabinets just are a little worn. You know, they're like little vintage. They've been through a hurricane. You know, there's some
There
little
you go.
fine cracks, but it's fine. And then he was able to spray paint match the other one,
Mhm.
and because there's nothing wrong with that. You can put back in what into your home what you want. And it is not insurance fraud, because I was worried. I was like, well, do I have to get the same level of flooring? You know, you paid me $10
Right.
a square foot. What if I want to get the luxury vinyl? And it's like, it's fine, because think about it. You've got a huge deductible too.
Right.
And you can rebuild how you want. But that's, yeah, on the rebuilding things, you want to think of stuff that's, you know, going to work for you in case something like that happens again. Hopefully that'll never happen again to the people in Western North Carolina. That was not a once in 100-year flood, wasn't it? A once in a, I mean, I know they have
1,000
1,000
years.
years.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's hopefully, knock on wood, never going to happen to him again. Unfortunately, being us on the coast, and the one guy told me, he goes, it's not if the next hurricane happens.
Mm.
Thus, he goes, it's when.
Yeah.
When.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, my goal for even having this discussion, of course, I mean, you think about the pictures that we're seeing right now from Western North Carolina. I just can't even hardly wrap my brain around the photos of complete loss and devastation. And again, my heart goes out to everyone who has been impacted by that. And secondarily, there are so many other people in Eastern Tennessee and other parts of North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Georgia, and Florida, who are all being impacted as well.
Even Virginia.
Even Virginia. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, up in Ohio, we got um severe heavy rain and winds last Friday. And I
Mhm.
was just talking with someone up in Dayton, which is about 45 minutes north of where I live. And there's still people without power in
Mhm.
Ohio. I mean, the
Wow.
storm was just
And I know most of these people have not been back, especially if you're managing from a different state. Most people are. They're not living at their house
right,
in Western North Carolina, and they haven't even been back to see it, because you can't get back to see it. Most
right,
roads are closed. So
right,
when you do go back to see it, it's, yeah,
right. What
goes out.
What are your recommendations for folks in that situation? Is it just to try to find someone local who can get to the property to check on it? I know a lot of my students, they were able to call someone local and say, "Hey, can you pop over to my house and check and see if it's still there?" Is that the best scenario, assuming that you've got local connections, just to find someone local who can check on your property for you?
I think that would be step one, but step two is somehow figure out how to get there. Not a helicopter, but
I agree with
boots
Maggie.
on the
But
ground. Gotta get
to be
there.
fair, just talking, there's also a lot of misinformation going on. Right now, I'm seeing maps and maps and verbiage on social media. The entire Western North Carolina is closed. That's not true. The entire mountain region is inaccessible. That's not true. Um, I keep hearing Asheville is only accessible by air. I know someone personally that Stacy, you know personally, that drove to downtown Asheville 3 days ago.
Mhm.
I mean, and not taking away from the devastation, because it 100% exists, but
And they don't
there's
want
a lot of there. What is happening, I think, is each individual will see a very tiny snippet of something that they were personally attached to, whether it was their home, their brother's home, their best friend lived there, and they saw these photos and they're being shared, but then everything is just being extrapolated.
Yeah,
So someone mentioned that there's over 10,000 square miles of just what we call Western North Carolina, which is bigger than Massachusetts, which is bigger than several states. You wouldn't say if there was an impact in Boston, don't go to Albany, New York. But that's what's happening. We're literally being told to stay out of the entire region. Bryson City, North Carolina, as an example, is wide open, and they really, really want tourists, and they need tourists because that's what their economy is based on. But the greater public is being told stay away. So that's another issue that's now being compounded, is that we're making these broad sweeping statements that apply to some areas, but they don't apply to the whole area, but they're being applied to the whole area. And it is actually what, these towns are going to be devastated from the storm, but my fear is social media will devastate the towns the storm didn't take out.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Go ahead, Maggie. Sorry.
We went, and I told my husband, we loaded, we gathered supplies from everybody, all kinds of realtors. We said, we're bringing a trailer down. And luckily we're contractors. We knew we needed tools. We needed this, we needed that. Also sleeping bags, air mattresses, things like that. If you're a camper and can camp, because you're not going to have power, generators. We loaded up a trailer. We were thankful that we had this kind of stuff, but we loaded a trailer and we went. We used Waze. Waze was pretty good. We hit flooded towns. It took us almost 3 days to get here from Fredericksburg, Virginia, but we made it. And we stayed in some sketchy hotels too. I had my daughter helping me. She was trying to find hotel rooms. All the hotel rooms along the route. We got stuck in Wilson, and there was just like floodwaters. You just couldn't figure out which back roads. And
I slept outside on my deck for 2 days. The first 2 days I came to Topsail.
Bring camping gear. I mean, it's an adventure.
So to Maggie's point, I think step one is find someone local or local-ish and pay them to make the trip in. If your local contacts are otherwise occupied with their own house or their own issues, find someone close enough by and pay them to drive over and do a video assessment. But to Maggie's point, it is your asset. Figure out how to get there. And it's important.
People think, and I saw on one of the social media posts, someone had posted pictures. Yeah, our house is still okay. It's standing, and you could see the flood mud, and you could see just like the flood. And I'm thinking, oh, honey, you don't know. Your house is not okay. You think that's okay? No, it's not okay. Because when you see the floodwater trail through like a lower level, they're like, yeah, we only got a little bit of water. A little bit of water can do a lot.
It's still very hot in North Carolina.
Yes, and no power and water equals the bad M word. So,
the word mold that we don't actually use with our insurance companies. We have learned that today. It's water damage. Maggie and Beata, I want to close this conversation and ask you, what word of encouragement can you offer someone who is experiencing some sort of loss right now? What would you tell them that could be a word of wisdom, but also help them understand that they will get through this? Maggie, I'll start with you.
I'm trying to think. Just that it will get better. I mean, it always gets better. The same thing with the death in the family, this and that. Each day you're stronger. Each day it gets better. Each day you make a hurdle, whether it's the call to the insurance company or finding a great guy that's willing to come over and work for cash. Oh, by the way, cash is king. Bring cash. Hit the ATM up. There's a lot of people that are out of work in these areas and they need cash. And we hired them to load dumpster after dumpster. So it gets better every day. Celebrate your successes, no matter how small they are, that you made it to your house to do the video, that you, the next day that, you found a place to sleep, found a place to eat. I mean, just celebrate your successes and give yourself some grace, pat on your back. And it gets better every day.
That's so great. Beata, how about you?
Number one, you will get through this. I promise you will make it to the other side. Look for support, ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for emotional help. Ask it to say, I need to cry. I need the dirty cry right now. Will you hold space for me? But in addition to that, you may not see it in the moment. And sometimes you can see snippets of it in the moment and in hindsight, but in hindsight, there are so many silver linings. I got to know my community better. I got to know other owners better. I got I have deep relationships with vendors on that island, even 6 years later, that I still have. It really does bring you together. You also, the reality is, you realize how much you can get through. So you just built your grit and resilience button. So everything since then, I mean, it's kind of a running joke in our house sometimes, is like, well, it wasn't at least as bad as Florence. Um, we find humor in it, right? Even in the darkest times, I do have a very dark sense of humor now because of that and some other situations. But the reality is, we have to laugh. And sometimes we have to laugh at our own expense. Sometimes we have to laugh at our circumstances. But the reality is, you will be okay no matter what comes your way. You will eventually be okay, and you will be stronger for it, and you will learn some lessons from it. And I promise you, no matter what, you'll make some different decisions based on this experience that will only make you better and stronger down the road. And like Maggie and I are doing right now, I knew even at the time that I had this deep knowing that I'm going through this so that I can help people down the road navigate the situation. And I've had several opportunities over the years to do that. So thank you, Stacy, for giving me the opportunity, because it does make it slightly better when you go through something that catastrophic. If you can help even one other person, get a tip that might help them, or just make them realize that they are truly not alone and they will get through the other side of it, that makes all the difference. And that makes some of the pain and suffering, I'm not going to say worthwhile, but at least that there's a reason for it, or that some good will come of it. Maybe that's the better way to put it, is some good will come of it, that we can pay it forward.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That's beautiful. Beata, Maggie, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you both, and I appreciate you sharing not only the awesome tips, the helpful advice, sharing your stories, and sharing your encouragement. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.